So,
Well, I don't know. I've got it's problem with me is I'm just always nosy. I've just got a ton of questions. So I know that there was the guy who had the channel, and then you guys took it over, and I'm just curious about that. But we don't have to talk about you guys. I mean, if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them too.
yeah, let's just explore the whole conversation. Mercury, do you want to take a stab at that first question?
So how this happened? Okay, yeah. So I don't know, Paul. Had you were you familiar with the channel back when Andrew ran it?
I had seen 3 or 4 of his videos. I was quite curious about it, but you know, there's only so many videos you can watch. So I'd watched a few of his videos, but I hadn't paid close attention. I too was fascinated by the whole experiment.
And so for me, I came across the first one of his videos was his interview with Jordan Peterson. So I came across that, and at that point, I was much more cut off, much more still hermitish, where I used, like I'd had internet for years, but I didn't use YouTube like social media. I wasn't even subscribing to channels at that point, beyond a couple, you know, like personal things. But I got this inner voice, like God told me to subscribe to Andrew and show him that bit of support. And it came with sort of you're going to be doing things for Andrew. And I thought, like, you know, how is it I'm going to help him? And it was just, don't worry, just subscribe for now. And then, honestly, at first I didn't watch much of his stuff because he was doing a lot about diet and exercise, and those just weren't things I was interested in. He had the occasional more philosophic stuff that I was interested in. But then one day I saw he had magic in the title of one video with a K. And I've been... yeah, I'm a magician, magic with a K. For me, that's closest to a label I'll take because it's so varied anyway. Like it's, and just my angel told me, like, see, we told you, like, watch that, take a look at it. And Andrew had made the connection between Alan Moore's work and Jordan Peterson's in that video. And I also had seen the connection between their works. And, so I was told by my angel, just, you know, reach out to Andrew. He needs someone to talk to about this. And because he spoke very little about the more esoteric stuff on his channel. And I thought I was going to, actually, you know, we have our sub-personalities. One of my sub-personalities really hoped I wouldn't hear back from him. You know, maybe all I have to do is send the message. But I heard back from him and he wanted to talk. And we just hit it off, and we started talking on a regular basis, and he was asking me a lot of advice about his channel as well. And that just led to him wanting to have me on the channel. And actually, I saw Peterson speak live before I did my first podcast with Andrew, and I brought it up to Peterson and just wanted to make sure, because he gets a lot of shit for his fans. Yeah. I offered that I would never bring up his name online if I did it, so as not to discredit him. But he gave me the go-ahead, and I ended up doing a couple podcasts with Andrew. That led to Ryan reaching out and saying he also wanted to talk to me. And so I started talking privately with Ryan a fair, you know, every so often, and did a couple podcasts there. And then when Andrew was ready to give up the channel, it's just, he was tired of having his private life out in public. He'd made good progress. And like, I don't want to reveal his personal details, but he made progress in a lot of the things he was trying to. And he had about 8 months before he gave us the channel. He'd tried a few times to just give the channel to me. And I just kept deflecting it and telling him to make sure he was sure. But when he was finally certain he wanted to give over the channel, instead of trying to just give it to me, he reached out to both me and Ryan and asked us, he thought that we would make a good team to take over for him. And that's how we got started. And that was about 2 months ago.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's really helpful. Thanks for that background.
Yeah.
I can understand, you know, because when I saw his project start, I thought, see, as a pastor, you're used to living with a persona because you have the persona of a pastor. You also have your private life. And so as a pastor, you get used to dealing with that. Now, YouTube is even more intrusive, and you have a channel then that takes off with thousands of people watching, that's, especially if you're deciding you're going to be transparent and vulnerable about the less the less Instagramish places of your life over the long haul. I'm not at all surprised he said, I need to step back and be a private citizen. That's very reasonable.
I agree with that. Yeah, 100%. And we've taken the channel in a little bit of a different direction. I mean, while we're definitely still including the vulnerability aspect, but there's a little more of a helping others coming into it. So we actually, you're the only other YouTuber we know of that does this, but having audience guests on. I don't know anyone else who's doing that. And that's been a really powerful, rewarding thing. And I told Mercury yesterday, I was like, there's kind of a pastoral aspect to what you're doing, Mercury. You're talking people through their problems. You and Paul share that in common. So we're really trying to do something that's for the good. We're trying, we think that this whole movement around Peterson is generating a deeper discussion, regardless of where you align in that discussion. And a lot of people who want to work on themselves intellectually, personally, psychologically, spiritually. And so we're trying to blend, like sometimes I'll come on and say, hey, I'm having a tough day. This is what I'm going through. Or other times I'll say, hey, this is what I want to teach today. This is what I have to offer today. This is what I'm contemplating. And so far, that's been a tricky balance, but a really rewarding one.
Good.
Yeah.
When we started the meetups here, one of the things that we've continued to wrestle with has been it's funny so before I did any of this stuff, I'm a pastor, worked in church planting, which is starting new churches, recruiting church planters. You always notice when you start a church, the church planter or the pastor of that new church, the church reflects that pastor, the strengths and the weaknesses. And when we started a meetup here, some of the people had been watching my videos, and so we spend a lot of time doing the kind of conversation that I do on my sort of monologue videos or commentary videos. But a number came into the group and said, I'd really love this group to be a place that we can work on ourselves in this context. And I see that need. And of course, groups have been helpful for many people for that kind of thing, 12-step groups, all sorts of different groups, because we really do facilitate and process in community. I think that's really the only way we can actually achieve permanent growth often. And so that's one of the things in our meetup we haven't really worked out in terms of how, because the group very much got started more with a commentary, monologue, theoretical, intellectual conversation I do in my stuff, and we really haven't done well with, okay, how are you doing this week? What do you need encouragement on? Where do you need to be checked or held account? What do you need to be held accountable to? That's, in my experience as a pastor, there needs to be a pretty strong relationship already established for those kinds of difficult conversations to really be stable and productive over a long term.
Sustainability.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's so fast. It seems like something is just happening though. You know what I mean? Like the fact that we're doing this audience guest thing and Nolan has been on, is that what's happening here? Is that community taking shape, do you think?
It's a totally new thing because this medium is new. And I do think what we're doing is really at the heart of what YouTube could be, where even though, yes, we do have personas, it is an artificial environment. It has many of the weaknesses that other social media platforms have. People need to talk, and especially for someone like Nolan, who obviously has limitations in terms of getting out and being with people, it makes perfect sense. So one of the things and I completely backed into this as on my channel, I mean, my whole channel was backing into in many ways. I never planned any of this, but I started having people began approaching me, writing me emails, wanting to talk, and I was doing a number of these things just offline. And these conversations I thought were so They were so good, and I thought so many other people could benefit from that. I began asking people, can we record these? Can we share these? And then that would gain momentum. And I could see in the comment section that some semblance of community was forming. And I found that with the conversational aspect, that heightened it, because obviously to see someone's face and to hear them speak gives you a much higher resolution view of the person. So I backed into it, but it's been wonderful.
Also with YouTube, the advantage you have here compared to like the way things would have been in the past for a pastor is that our brains respond to our screens the same way that they respond to people directly. And so when you watch a show on a regular basis, you respond to seeing those actors the way you respond to seeing loved ones. And so the way people can watch you on a regular basis, the reaction they have just to your face after a certain amount of time is that, it's an old friend. And so there's something far more personal here than you would imagine. You'd imagine the screen creates a distance, but as opposed to somebody reading, the works of C.S. Lewis, while they'll get the words from him, they don't feel like they're meeting a friend when they see his book. So you've got an intimacy with anyone who's been watching your videos. There's an established intimacy there that allows you to connect in a way that you couldn't just through preaching.
Well, that's a similar thing that does happen in churches, because preachers do share themselves certain kind of preachers share themselves with their sermons. And so, again, one of the things that I noted as a pastor was that many of the things as a pastor I was used to in a church context really communicated quite well over to YouTube, with some obvious differences and disadvantages too, because there is, in terms of us being face to face, if the three of us were in a room, and again, the resolution just, now suddenly we have much better sense of each other and all of those things.
Also, yeah, I meant you do have that with your regular congregation, but I meant in the past, if you wanted to travel, you could go to a place, but it would just be your words. There wouldn't be that connection. Or if you were writing, it's the spreading the message beyond your church. YouTube makes it much more personal in that farther reach than it would be if you were just writing, or the ways they would have done it in the past.
Oh, yes.
And I do agree with everything you said about people needing community and that the conversation and dialogue to work out their thoughts. Although that is not true for me. That's one thing that, like, I've heard Peterson say as well. And for a lot of this shit, I'm the exception to the rule. And just in case you don't know, like, I'm bipolar, and very bipolar. And the way I've come to this is after my second cycle, I went off into isolation, and I had 2 years of no phone, no internet, no vehicle. My parents dropped off my supplies, and I was just a lunatic hermit. And I put myself together in isolation. And I still spend I spend a lot of time alone still. I am married, but my wife lives on a farm just over there. And it's because I need my time alone. So it's almost like when a family split up and the kids spend some nights at dad's, except also mom spends some nights at dad's. But for me, I found, just get away from the world for a couple of years. You'll find God. You'll notice your subpersonalities in your own with any psychiatrist. You'll realize the importance of honesty. And I see the value of someone going off and just finding enlightenment, or just going off and connecting to Christ, in a cave and living simply. They don't need to teach. They don't need to anything for that to be good. I went off into isolation. And in fact, earlier on, when every personal revelation feels universal, I remember at one point thinking, I've solved it. Everyone just needs to spend 1 year alone. Everyone just needs to take 1 year instead of at college, just in your early 20s, go off, spend 1 year alone, and everything's going to be fine. But as I've reconnected and I've learned more from Peterson and like what you were saying and observing others, I've realized, no, most people go mad in isolation. So this is kind of like the snake pit, where they used to think you lower an insane person into a snake pit and what drives someone else insane will balance them. for me, the isolation balanced me. And also, I do realize with everyone else, there's a fair amount of persona to what you are on YouTube. With me, not at all. And I have no plan whatsoever. And so far, every live stream, every conversation has been, it's like stepping off a cliff. I haven't prepared for anything. I've always, and early on, like my first one with Andrew, after all this time alone, there's a lot of anxiety about going on with him. But I just cleared my mind, trusted that the Holy Spirit had guided it this far, and that I would just know what to say. Everything for me is just reacting to the present moment honestly, and trusting something good will come of this.
You know, I liken it to Mercury's the shaman of the group who lives on the outskirts of society. So I think that that's an interesting metaphor. And I'm glad that you're self-aware to think of it in a way that, you know, you're the exception to the rule rather than the actual rule.
Yeah, or what Pajot would say in his wording. I live off on the edge of the map where it says, "Here there be dragons." And yeah, Pajot might represent me with a dog head.
Yeah. Yeah. But one of the things I wanted to bring up too, Paul, is I was watching your video this morning, and the one that was uploaded early on this morning. And one of the things that struck me is this guy has a voracious intellectual appetite. That could be my own projection, but
that's true.
Yeah, you have a huge intellectual appetite. And so what's so unique about this movement though, and whatever it is that we're a part of, what you're doing, what we're doing on Sorting Myself Out, is we're meeting that middle zone between the intellect and the authentic human transformation or the personal growth. And your channel outlines that perfectly, because you'll do an analysis of something, then you'll talk to an audience guest, and then you'll do another analysis, and you're striking this interesting balance. And I noticed that the listeners seem to appreciate that balance. They seem to, and maybe some come for the personal stuff and some come for the intellectual stuff, but there's a lot that seem to be coming for that interesting meal that's being balanced perfectly on the plate.
Yeah. When I started this, you know, again, it was something totally new for me. And then some of my friends who know me quite well, I explained what I was doing, and they said, "Oh, you're just doing what you always do. You're just doing it on YouTube." And that's true. I've always had a big appetite for intellectual material. My monologue videos and my commentary videos, they're just all me processing and thinking out loud. That's all they are in many ways, and just deciding to share it. And if others find it helpful, that's great. I started this because, like many people, I think one of the huge gifts that Jordan Peterson has given the world is that he somehow has created spaces for people to find each other, which is something the internet does well, but to find each other to talk about the kinds of things he talks about, which is very broad. And so then when I started the in-person meetup, you know, I just put on meetup.com, you know, Jordan Peterson meetup, come and talk. And that's all we do. So it is, for me, obviously also as a pastor, a balance between the face-to-face personal, the life of the intellectual, and trying to make sense of the world. And that, you know, my channel basically reflects that.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, from an outsider's perspective, looking in on it, that's exactly what it looks like. So the other question I have is, do you see, like you say, you're just doing what you love to do. You're just doing what you're already doing. But do you have a mission? Do you have something? Is there an outcome for this YouTube thing that you're doing that you'd like to see happen, or are you just simply following it wherever it goes?
I'm mostly following it wherever it goes. As early on, so I had, as you observed, I do have a voracious intellect, and part of it as a pastor is ongoing education. In about 2006, I did a similar deep dive into Tim Keller, because what I saw in Tim Keller was someone who was effective in their environment, who I could learn from. And so I spent 5-6 years listening to everything that Tim Keller was preaching, reading everything he would write, blogging about it. I didn't have a YouTube channel. And then in 2017, I discovered Jordan Peterson. And again, I saw someone, especially when I saw he was doing the biblical lectures and the response he was getting from it, I said, there's a ton I need to learn from this guy. So I just started going about what I had done with the Tim Keller search in terms of reading everything, listening to everything. But at some point I said, there's something I need to learn from YouTube, because YouTube is an essential part of the Jordan Peterson story. And so then I thought, well, I'll make a video. And I made a video, and I figured I'd get 100 or 200 subscribers and, 5 or 10 good conversation partners, and that would be cool. And I'll continue to just learn and do what I did. And that didn't happen. The next Sunday, my friend shows up at church with a poster and says, I've never been to church before in my life, but I saw your video, so here I am. And I started getting emails from people and requests for conversation. So now the calling in my life is that of a pastor. And when people come to me, and people come to pastors for every reason you can imagine. I don't have enough money to pay my rent. I had a fight with my wife. My kid is going astray. I mean, all this stuff gets dumped on pastors. And so suddenly I've got dozens of people coming to me, every day, 2, 3, 4, 5 emails from people telling me their story. And so then as a pastor, it's like, well, what do I do with this? Well, am I going to turn my back and say, no, because you don't live in Sacramento or come into my sanctuary on Sunday morning, I'm not going to talk to you? That's an abdication of my calling. So I've got to talk to these people. So then the question is, how can I actually fit that into my responsibilities here at my local church? And so this is exactly what I've been doing.
Okay, so with you, it's like you had, rather than really planning out the YouTube channel, it's just that you have a relationship with God that guides your action. So you were just always doing what you felt in the moment you were being called to do. And it has led to all this where you've sort of fallen ass backwards into something that you didn't expect.
Exactly.
I don't think he thought his YouTube channel was going to make him famous. Maybe he thought Maps of Meaning was going to. I think he might have expected Maps of Meaning to change the world.
Yeah.
And then, but I think after the way his TVO appearances didn't amount to much, I think he had accepted a smaller life and was just doing what he felt in the moment. And I think Peterson fell into this fame. He might have envisioned it when he was younger, writing Maps of Meaning, but I think he fell ass backwards into his fame. And with me, this has come from just doing what I was asked to do. Like my angel tells me to reach out. Like basically I made a deal with God that I'm just going to live simply, take care of myself. And if the universe wants anything from me, it will ask. So I don't have to go looking to do anything. If someone wants something from me, they will clearly ask me for it. And that's how I fell into doing this channel. So to jump into the shit that Peterson will always shy away from, is there something metaphysical going on here in your opinion? Because I see with all three of us that we didn't plan this. It was a matter of paying attention to internal guidance. And now all of a sudden here I am talking to you and asking you what's going on metaphysically that Peterson doesn't want to discuss with anyone. Yeah. Oh, and I was raised Catholic. I was an altar boy. I love Christianity. I've explored many other areas, but I love Christianity. And yeah, I'm happy to jump entirely into your framework for this answer.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And so I actually did crazy things have happened to me since I started this thing. A guy writes me from Australia and says, I want you to do a conference about Jordan Peterson here in Australia. And I was like, the idea just seemed preposterous to me. But he said, no, you really have something important to say. So I'll figure out the finances. You just come. And I went there and thought, well, if he's a crazy guy who doesn't really have the finances, well, then I'll go to Australia and I'll rack up a bunch of credit card debt. But so be it. Let's give it a shot. But no, he was a wonderful man, and he was true to all of his promises, and we had a wonderful conference. And so the video I posted earlier this week basically walks that out. I think God is using Jordan Peterson to call back to himself a whole bunch of people that have gotten lost. And And now people, when I say this, other pastors and other Christians say that they start complaining about what Jordan thinks and believes, and none of that matters to me. Well, what's between God and Jordan Peterson? God and Jordan Peterson will sort out. Okay, none of that matters to me. But the effect that he's having is this, and I need to learn from this. And then I also saw that, well, when Jordan Peterson got on that status rocket, who on earth is going to be able to talk to him? And so I know perfectly well people find me because I'm available, and I think I praise God for that. Yeah. And then people are like, well, you'll have 1 million subscribers someday. And part of me says, I never want to have 1 million subscribers, because then I would have to sort people according to money or status or what I can get out of them, which is how you have to sort people if you have a flood of people coming to you.
Yeah, that's
probably right. The only one who really managed that right was Jesus, and I'm not Jesus. So
I was going to say, you don't have to use those sorting methods. Ask Jesus. Let him sort it. If you get to 1 million, just ask the Holy Spirit for the guidance.
That's right.
Any of those other metrics, you're uncomfortable.
So let me make sure I'm getting this straight, all right? Because we've got a shaman of the amateur dark web, we've got a pastor, and we've got a pastor of the amateur dark web. It's pretty amazing. Is something happening here, Paul? Is something forming here?
I don't ask God to reveal his plans to me.
Oh, I gotcha.
I just ask for my daily bread and for him to tell me what to do next. And
so you're about 20 steps ahead of me, because I'm still asking for the whole map. Show me the outline. Come on.
And I'm right in vibe with you, Paul. I've given up on asking about long-term or where it goes. You just listen to what God's telling you to do now. And if you're always doing the right thing now, you'll look back and see you did the right thing at every moment.
That's right.
If you're worrying about the past and thinking about what to do in the future at the expense of now, you'll look back and realize you fucked it all up.
And I think therein lies some of the wisdom that comes from having more life experience. I'm still naive enough to want to see the whole map.
Oh, we all want to. That's not a mystery. But then the question is, what would I do if I did? Because there's Andy Crouch used to be editor of Christianity Today. He has a great article that he wrote years ago called A Reverse Testimony. You can find it if you Google it, where he, like many people, he wanted to hear God's voice. He wanted to hear God direct him. And so there was a situation where, as it is if you're, 20-something, should he stay with this girl, or, should he follow her across the country, blah, 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 blah. And he had never in his life heard God speak. And he was sitting there praying, and then God said, no. He's like, no. And then it was like, then he heard it again, no. In other words, don't do it. And he did it anyway. Oh, and it's just a perfect example of how we are. And if God tells us, we may or may not believe anyway. Our problem is obedience and trust. Those are always our problems. So give you the map, not give you the map, it won't make a difference.
Beautifully put.
Also, if you got the map, you might be disappointed and be like, well, fuck, I just read the last page of the mystery. Now what's the point of reading this whole book? Like, how much more exciting was it the way we met all by accident? How much fun is it to be talking to Paul when we didn't expect it?
Exactly.
You had the whole map laid out ahead of you.
If somebody would have told me that I was going to be talking to Paul when I first saw your Peterson video, when you talked to Peterson, I don't know, how long ago was that?
That was last April. That was a year ago.
Okay,
now.
I saw that video, and I felt completely detached. I had my own little YouTube channel or my own little podcast where I was doing my own thing on transformation, and I just felt like I was 100 miles away from you guys, literally. And now we're on the same call. It's weird. It's it's a little bit surreal.
Yeah. That's life, and it's this whole thing for me is surreal.
Yeah.
It's beyond bizarre for me, but follow that lamb wherever he goes. That's what you do.
That's amazing.
And I find the one thing Peterson's offering us is, I remember like when I was younger, noticing that if you control the media, if everyone's watching the same shows, listening to the same music, going to the same movies, seeing the same news, the way it was in the 80s, where TV was on, you had to see what was playing. It's much easier to control a population. And of course, like me getting into punk was recognizing that and rebelling from all the brainwashing of it. But then you proceed to the postmodern era where you realize, but if everyone's listening to something different, everyone's watching something different, we can't communicate anymore. And you realize the power of our myths and our media and our shared stories. And then you look at something like a Star Trek convention, where you can take all these isolated people, like many who don't have great social skills, not to be overly stereotypical about it, but you can take them from all over the place, put them in this one building where everyone knows everyone loves Star Trek, and all that loneliness, that inability to connect, you have an excuse to walk around loving people because we all love Star Trek. And so when you go to these kind of conventions, the most different people, cops and criminals, can get along at a convention like that if they all love the same sports team or love the same movie. And Peterson is providing us that. Yeah. But where also we know that if you're into Peterson, you're also trying to be honest. You're aiming to make the world a better place. Yeah. And so he's giving us that convention that we've all watched the same thing. And he's giving us an excuse to love each other because we're afraid. We're lonely and we don't talk about our feelings and we feel isolated. And we're trying to work things out and it's vulnerable and personal and we are scared to do it. Peterson gives us that, wait, you like Peterson too? Okay, I'm really lonely and here's the problems I'm having. And oh my God, you're listening? I really love you. And that's what he's allowing us to use that banner to gather people and give them permission to love each other, form a connection, and aim at the good.
Well, and I think your point too about the shared media, the disintegration of the shared media with the multiplication of platforms forces us to the deeper myths beneath.
Yes.
And so whereas before it was sufficient for the 3 networks or the book or whatever to provide the layer upon which community could develop. Now, because of the multiplication of platforms, we have to look for the myths beneath and can't just live on the more temporary ones on the surface. So I think that's a really great observation. And
actually, let's launch from there because we may have viewers for this who aren't familiar with you. What's the most important thing you want to say to anyone coming across you for the first time? Like, what's the most important myth for you personally? What would you most like to share?
Well, I'm a Christian pastor, obviously, and so I believe in the mother of all myths, which is in fact found in the Bible. And what interested me about Peterson was I saw someone who didn't necessarily identify as a Christian or with a particular Christian denomination or tribe, recognizing the myth beneath the civilization. And so, obviously as a Christian minister, I'm a servant of Jesus Christ. That's what I've made promises to do, and I intend to keep these promises, even though I do so poorly at times. But that to me is the myth beneath the stories that we are feeding off of.
And what's the most powerful thing about, because not everyone who says Christ means the same thing. Yeah, like Peterson points out, we all mean something different. And I don't get the vibe off you that you've ever made a billboard that starts with God hates. So for some people who might have the wrong impression of a Christian pastor,
Sure.
What do you feel is the most fundamental message of Christ?
Christianity begins with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And to me, what that resurrection means is, even though this world stacks up hierarchies where we see the wealthy and the beautiful and the brilliant, every single person that God makes is his image bearer. And each of us in the resurrection of Jesus Christ have hope and a promise to reign with him in a in a united heaven and earth, which we will go further up and further in. And when we're there 10,000 years bright, shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. So to me, the heart of Christianity is the crucifixion and resurrection and living that out. That's the heart of the gospel.
That's fantastic. Beautiful picture you paint.
For you, the connection of heaven and earth is not metaphorical at all. Like you're looking forward to the metaphysical alteration of reality with Revelation, the reunion.
Yes. Well, one of the phrases that I was known for, or at least around here, is the age of decay. In other words, everything you build in this earth breaks down. Whether you build a corporation, it will become corrupted. Our bodies break down. Every love will end in betrayal or death. And what the hope of the resurrection says, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, Jesus was raised to a body that doesn't decay. In other words, through our resurrection, we will not decay. I was just thinking this morning, another one of the points that I make often is that if you ask your question what a human being is or what our soul is, in many ways, it's sort of our story. And I was thinking this morning, I just went to the eye doctor this morning just for a checkup, and my eyes are fine and I can get away most of the time without glasses. But that day will end. I mean, every time you go to the doctor, the reason people avoid going to the doctor is it's a reminder of the age of decay that, next year or the year after when I go, I'll be just this much less healthy and this much less healthy. Now there are things that I can do. I can sort myself out. I can eat better. I can exercise. I can do all of that. And I might just adjust that a little bit back. And I can, at the age of 57, be healthier than I was at 55. You can do that, but you're not really destroying the ark. One day it catches up to you, and it catches up to all of us. And there's something inside of us. The book of Ecclesiastes says God placed eternity in our hearts, and I think we're haunted by that. And so C.S. Lewis made the point that we all have this desire for something that we've never seen and never known. And I see that fulfilled in the resurrection. And what I see the Bible saying is that is our promise. And so then part of the problem with, in my videos I talk about secularism a lot, part of the problem with secularity is, if you say, if all I am is going to live to 80, 90, or 100, or 70 even, 80, 90, or 100, what that means is now suddenly hierarchies develop, and I might say, why should I spend time talking to Ryan and Mercury? What will I get from them? It begins to reorient your life in a very selfish way. But if, in fact, the story of the Bible is true, well then, really the new age begins now. And so I can talk to you guys, and some would say, well, there's more important people of higher status, people that talk to someone who has a YouTube channel of 100,000, and then you'll get an extra 1,000 or 2,000 subs from that. That's how you should orient your life. Well, if I do orient my life like that, well, what does that mean? It means that Ryan and Mercury and someone that I can't get anything out of for my little short time span, you've all taken a demotion. And what we wind up doing is using each other. And here's the irony about human beings. None of us want to be used. All of us want to be loved. And so what the gospel says is, in the resurrection, I now have the time and permission and luxury to love people that won't get me anything or anywhere. And to me, when I see that and recognize that and then live that out, it's just beautiful, instead of this using each other all the time.
But to me, that framework even of talking to someone who won't get me anywhere is if we're thinking of the journey as just being this body. When you honestly believe that it continues, you're no longer living for this life. You're living for the sake of your eternal soul, and instead doing your now, which doesn't bring you any money or glory or doesn't give you any earthly reward, is perhaps taking you exactly where you need to go. It's taking you to that final shining city. And if your goal is your status here on earth, your bank account here on earth, what your eulogy sounds like, then you will use people because that seems to be taking you to the right eulogy. But if you're aiming for the shining city on the hill, the eulogy is the beginning of the real journey.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you won't look at people that same way. Also, I find some people can go to spirituality and definitely magic for a very selfish purposes. What you're trying to do is find the energies, entities, or God itself. And I mean, you can do totally Christian magic, but that you're trying to connect to them so that you can tell them what you want. And I found instead and at first it sounds like one of those wag your finger things. Like, don't go to God for what you want, go to God for what he wants. But it's not a wag your finger thing. It's like, try it. Go to God with, instead of, here's what I want, to just, hey, what do you want? Because he's got such better ideas than you.
That's right.
A metaphor I'd used recently was like, if we use ourselves as the metaphor for God, the way we're created in his image, and use the animal kingdom as the metaphor for humanity and our monkey bodies, imagine if a chimp came up to a community, a wild chimp, and behaved the way we wanted a chimp to behave. It was friendly, it did tricks, it didn't throw its shit at us. We would love that chimp. And if poachers came around, the village would protect them. It's like, try doing what God and the angels want us to do, and wait to see how they react to that. And it's not a wag your finger, do it because you should. It's like, hey, try it. Live by what God wants you to do for a few years, and wait till you see how nice he is to this little chimp. And no, it's
I love that story. I'm going to use that. See, pastors are thieves. When we hear a story like that, it's like, oh, that's a good story. I'm going to take that in the back of my mind, and I'll leak that into a sermon at some point.
That's my gift to you for giving us your time today.
Thank you. I will probably use it.
Steal anything you want from me.
I have a really interesting question for you, Paul. To me, it's interesting, at least. How do you reconcile the intellect and the deeper intuitions you have about life, and where do those things intersect, and where have you found it difficult to bridge, and what advice would you give to others who are wrestling with the same issue?
I think Ian McGilchrist has an interesting framework, and Peterson has followed McGilchrist in this, in terms of now the right brain, left brain are as much conceptual as they are literal here, or probably more conceptual. That, the right brain is unexplored territory, and the left brain is mapped territory. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, the intuitions are the unexplored territory. That's how the right brain speaks to the little conscious center that is you, that is your story that you're aware of. And then the left brain tends to be the intellect. It wants to, okay, here's all this unexplored territory. Let's map it. One of the things that, I've been not only following Peterson, but paying a lot of attention to John Vervaeke and his work, because he's doing a lot of work on this salience stuff.
Yes.
And it's that salience stuff is a very interesting area. Now, one of the things that I say often, which is integral to this, is that in Christianity, the God of creation is the God of redemption, which means that, that little voice that goes off in your head, that could be God talking. Sometimes it's just me being an idiot. Sometimes it's, me, my desires or my hungers. And so, I have to work on discerning these voices and figuring out what's me, and so on and so forth. But God has built himself, and this is, I think, the point actually of the Peterson Sam Harris, if you pay attention to what Peterson was trying to lay out in those 4 talks, and Sam just kept stonewalling him, that God has built himself into this creation. And that's what I talk about in terms of God number 1. And you can get this in the book of Isaiah, where an angel shows up in the temple and cries, "Holy, holy, holy." That's the God of heaven. That's the God who is way out there. The whole earth is full of his glory. So that's God number 1, built into us, built into this world. In him we live and move and have our being. And so the intellect is very much trying to take a world that is far larger than we can ever hope to map, but taking strides to accurately map it in a productive way that can be helpful to me and helpful to others. And so that's constantly what I'm doing. And Peterson, I think, has again, really given us a gift, because one of the things he notes is that what you have to do is kind of lean in towards So you have your mapped territory, but you always have to lean in towards the territory that isn't mapped.
Yeah.
And you have to keep doing that. And that will keep showing you new vistas, new opportunities, and actually make you useful to the people around you. And those people really will reward you with subscribing, or supporting through Patreon, or coming to your church, or giving you great stories about chimps and communities, what have you. So keep working that. Keep listening to that call of Abraham. So that's how I see it.
That's a great analysis of that question. It seems to me as well that one of the things that Peterson writes about in Map's Meaning is the Luciferian tendency for the intellect to fall in love with itself. And how if the intellect isn't loyal to some sort of larger abstraction of being, then it just falls into this perpetual self-serving nature. So what the work that you're doing, the work that Peterson's doing, a lot of great people out there, that involves getting the intellect on board with these larger intuitions, I think is just some of the most important work being done in the world right now. And to a rationalist, to a pure rationalist, it just doesn't make any sense. Because why would you do that?
Yeah.
What's the point of doing that?
Well, the rationalist says, at least the modernist style rationalist that we might find with someone like Sam Harris, says, I want to make sure that all of my ideas are mapped accurately onto this particular framework of reality. And so the framework of reality then becomes the accountability structure that the mapping is tested against. Peterson comes along and says, that's fine. That's a noble goal and it's good. But the kinds of information accessible to that framework are very limited. In fact, they're so limited, we are all using many other frameworks to live, and we need those frameworks. And so if you kind of dismiss those other frameworks and say human beings live in a box like this, you're actually lying, because you're not really looking at the larger world. And so again, I think Peterson has been tremendously helpful in, and again, what he's done is he has taken these important observations, things that, Peterson is right, have been embedded in the humanities for generations. And it's been within the humanities that we've kind of been working on these areas outside Sam Harris's little box. And Peterson is saying, yeah, but we've been corrupting that effort too. And so Peterson, I think he deserves the attention and the praise and adoration that he's gotten in this, because he's opened up the world again for a lot of people. And now there are larger, see, as a Christian, then you begin to say, well, you have this other framework, you have this theological framework that you're also accountable to, not just to the material world, but also this other framework. And you have to, so you keep working it. And you work it until you die, and it's continual.
Yeah. Do you? I got an image while you were saying that, like, some of the frameworks kind of decay and fall away, and then you have to rebuild another one. Is that true?
Yeah, because we're always working. For example, theology. Even though someone might say, let's say you're a Protestant, where you say, okay, so you have the Bible and you focus on the Bible. The Bible doesn't change. But the world keeps changing, and usually what you're working off are your own theological frameworks. Well, it's the age of decay. These theological frameworks break down, and other things come in, and so you continually have to make new ones. But then you have that balance where you need to continue to listen to the old, otherwise you live in the little box of the now, which is also a distortion. But you can't let the old be. You have to figure out how to manage the old and the new. And so you're always doing this work. And Peterson is right in that the product of this are the decisions that you make.
You're very adaptable. You're not holding on rigidly to the past. It sounds like you're taking what's useful from the past and you're adapting it to what's necessary in the present.
Yeah, and you're sometimes you're holding rigidly to things, because sometimes you should hold rigidly to things. Sometimes you should hold them loosely, and you're going to have to figure that out. And a lot of times you'll get stuff wrong, but this is what life. This is the task of life.
Right. I got to ask you about answer to Job. Why is God so messed up? Like, why is he so mean in that story? And I mean, no offense in saying that to God, but What's up with that? Why
Well,
does
Answers
he
to
do
Job was Jung's take on the book of Job.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry.
The book of Job in the
Answer to
Bible.
Job,
Yeah.
and I got that impression from Jung that it's like this is kind of the unfair nature of being. And then Peterson even mentioned that. What do you think of? First of all, what do you think of Jung's take on it? And then do you make any differentiation in your take?
I haven't read the whole book. I've read parts of it, and I've read some summaries of the book. Part of what we are dealing with, part of what happened after Descartes was a turn towards the self. And at the heart of modernity has been, modernity tried to balance the self with the objective. Postmodernity loses, is skeptical about the objective, and all you have left is the self. And I think we're discovering the self is a human being, as the self is too small to build a world on. God has a problem in that God can't help but be himself. And human beings have a problem, and I think this is a strong theme throughout the Bible. Part of our problem is that we want to be God. And I don't think it's unlike the 2-year-old or the teenager that comes to their parent and says, "You're mean to me, you don't love me." Now, some parents aren't good parents, but if the parent is a good parent and does in fact love the child, the good parent will listen to that accusation that they are unloved and just look at the child and think, "I've fed you, I've clothed you, I've protected you, I've treated you well. You're using this accusation as a way to manipulate me, but for your own sake and because of who I am, I'm not going to allow a 2-year-old to manipulate me, because if you leave the 2-year-old in charge of the house, everyone will suffer." Yeah. So God is God, and that's in a sense how the book of Job ends. Job is in many ways, and what's part of the beauty of that book, he's rightfully angry, because in a sense, it's kind of a trading places scene where these two guys are like the Eddie Murphy movie, where they mess up Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy's lives for the sake of their little bet. And at the end of it, God's point to Job is, do you really want to take me on? Do you really think you can? Do you really think you can decide and stand in judgment over me? And Job basically answers by saying, "I place my hand over my mouth." But part of the beauty of the Bible is that the Bible has many books. And so that answer in Job is a great answer. But that doesn't undo either Abraham, where God stands before Abraham and takes Abraham's advice, and it doesn't undo Jacob wrestling with God. All of those things are
none of them are in a vacuum.
That's right. And they're all speaking. And so
you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just take the book of Job and look at Carl Jung's analysis of that and say, well, therefore, this is the way it is. You have to look at the global gestalt of the whole. Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that.
Yeah, the same way that nobody could take one video that you've made, Ryan.
That would be a big mistake.
Put together a complete picture of what you're like.
That's right. Well, we get that a lot on YouTube too, where you see one thing someone says, and then you get to characterize their whole life story.
And we do it.
Oh, yeah, I do it all the time. We're just such judgers, you know.
Yeah.
Well, modern society, we're very encouraged to instantly have an opinion on everything.
Yeah.
And I actually just noticed this recently, how much, even in myself, as disconnected from society as I was, how much I had this pressure to have an opinion on everything. And I'd been thinking about it myself. And it's funny to watch like Jimmy Kimmel's Lie Witness News, where people will give an opinion on an absolute lie, is how programmed we are to have an opinion. And I'd been thinking about that for a few days. And one day, me and my wife were watching television, and I forgot what kind of dog it was, but she said, "Do you like that kind of dog?" And I noticed my brain was going to make up whether I liked it or not, but I had no opinion. And I decided to try it. I just said, "I have no opinion on that." And my wife let that go. She just nodded, like she's used to a lot of weirdness for me. And so I thanked her for reacting that way. And I pointed out that I expect most people would say, what do you mean you don't have an opinion on that dog?
Right.
Look at it and formulate an opinion. But
Right
why
now.
the fuck do we feel like we have to judge everything? Do you like this? Do you like that? What do you think of the way they dress? What do you think of this political opinion? What do you think of this person? Why do we have to be judging everything? Can't we just
we're so afraid of not knowing, I think. At least that's what Dr. Strachan always tells me. Human beings are so afraid of not having answers.
Yeah, and
That's kind of what we were talking about with the map, of me wanting to see the map. And
exactly, and that's the blessing that lunacy gave me. Have a couple total psychotic breaks, end up in a mental institution, and you'll realize you don't know what the fuck's going on. And you have to get used to, I don't know. That was like the blessing insanity gave me, is it knocked me the fuck down. And all right, no, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to be open-minded and just pay attention to what I can perceive.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, we're very uncomfortable with I don't know, and the problem is that's everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right. We know so little.
Yeah.
We really are. It's just how we are. We're so pretentious, and that's part of why I like the end of the book of Job, where, you know, God says, where were you when I cast the stars in the sky? Were you there? Were you telling me where they should go? Little center of the universe. You know, and that's why I think Jordan Peterson's admonition to clean your room is so apropos, because it's like, all right, little center of the universe, why don't you first just start by, you know, keeping your own house in order before you indulge us all in your pretense of managing our lives. And, you know, as a pastor of a church, you see that all the time. The number one prayer request, which is often unspoken, is, Lord, manage someone else's life the way I want it done. Or Lord, manage the universe the way I think it should be managed.
Right.
And God at this point looks at us as a 2-year-old and says, I love you, but you're 2.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's so interesting about prayer. I got sober through 12-step programs a bit, and you're probably well aware that involves making contact with a higher power, and there's a lot of Christian influence on the origin of Alcoholics Anonymous and so forth. But one of the things I learned in my sobriety that I still hold dearly is, when you pray, I'll speak in an I statement instead, but when I pray, I also need to listen. Like, I can't just like throw out all these statements all the time, like give it this, that, this, and then I like cover my ears and walk away. I never bother to like listen for an answer. And I think that's why Peterson's teaching about go sit on your bed and ask a question. And if you just listen, an answer will miraculously appear. And he says it doesn't really matter if it comes from somewhere inside of you, or if you want to think of it as God, because something's happening there. Something's coming back. And I've found that with prayer, that even I might get an answer if I'm asking the wrong question. Like, I'll get that feeling like, no, you're asking the wrong question. Ask it this way. And then like I can change the way I'm asking that, or I can ask for something different. And it's just like, if we can learn to have a conversation with whatever the spirit is, or whatever God is, or whatever the angels are, then I feel like we're constantly in that Hegelian dialectic where we say something, then it says something, then we reach a synthesis, and we continue to build on that process. But if we don't do that, we're stultifying ourselves, and then we're complaining, oh, I didn't get an answer, or, you know, I didn't get this, I didn't get that. And it's just it just seems to be such an archaic way to relate to prayer. And prayer is such an underrated form of, what you could call it, a form of meditation, or a form of spiritual practice. It's so underappreciated. The power of it, in my life at least, has just been profound, and I don't even use it enough. I should be kicking myself. It's like, I know how powerful it is for me, and then why am I not doing it all the time?
John Calvin says prayer is our chief work, which is humbling as a pastor, because I look at how much time I spend fretting over, you know, whatever it is I'm worrying about managing, instead of beginning with prayer. That's a constant issue for myself and for many Christians.
Yeah. And from a psychological lens and a Petersonian lens, at the very minimum, you're developing the right attitude to life through prayer. Like, you know how Peterson likes to look at things from a pragmatist perspective a lot? at the very minimum, that's what you're doing. And then like we could get into all sorts of metaphysical speculations about that. One of the things you talked to Mark about when you had him on the same day we did is how Mercury was talking about how Peterson walks right up to the edge of the metaphysical and then turns around. And I think maybe as a wrap-up question, I'm wondering like why do you think he does that, first of all? Is it a status thing? And would you like to see him, or what is there any way that you'd like to see him improve on that, like as a fan, as a listener, as somebody who likes his work? Is there something that you see in that, or do you think he's doing his work just the right way he should be doing it?
Well, every time Peterson prefaces his comments about the Bible or theology with he's speaking about this psychologically, what he is signaling is what I call a form of natural theology. He is trying to map out, he's trying to do science, and that's a legitimate endeavor. And he also, better than most, appreciates the limits of science. And so what he's trying to do, especially when he was talking to David Nasser in some of those conversations at Liberty University, he's looking for the edges of science. And you'll hear him use that language again and again, that he's reaching the edges of what he can know. And that's exactly right. There are limits to what we can, the knowledge we can establish and demonstrate with those tools. I think he also has an interesting habit of, and this is pretty typical for a modernist framework, an interesting habit of saying that what goes beyond that is private, which, okay, you can do that. That's legitimate. This fact, we started this conversation talking about, not everyone should be on YouTube exposing everything. To live as the Truman Show is not something I would recommend to the vast majority of people. I think I have hope. We saw some teasers of his conversation with Bishop Barron. I think in many ways Jordan Peterson is the Truman Show, and many people are watching him and wondering, how's this going to end? Where's he going? See, what's so interesting is that we're so interested in, okay, so you got all the science stuff, but what's beyond it, Jordan? What do you really believe in terms of the unification of heaven and earth? What do you really believe in terms of the resurrection? What do you really believe in terms of God? Why are we so curious about this? I'm there with the rest of us watching the Truman Show, watching the Jordan Show, and saying, okay, but I don't need to, I have what he has offered us through his YouTube, through his writing, through just how he's interacted in the world has given me a huge gift. Jordan Peterson does not owe me anything. And so this is God's world, and Jordan and God, God will deal with Jordan and Jordan will deal with God as they will. It's just fun watching. And to whatever degree I get to play a role in it, I'm happy. So
you set a great example of humility. I love that.
And I have one thing I'd like to wrap up on. So everything Ryan said about prayer is fantastic. And I do think the most important part of prayer for the average person and for the majority of the time is the listening side of it. But there's also that other side to prayer that I was even sort of denigrating earlier, the asking for and the metaphysical, magical side of it. As a pastor, do you believe in that ability, like for prayer to actually manifest something? So in other words, do you have any superpowers with that? And if you do, I would love to finish on a prayer, but always be very careful when we're asking. I would love to finish if you would do a prayer that we are guided properly, the three of us, that we recognize the importance of what's going on right now, and that the three of us are asking for guidance so that we can do his will rather than ours, and that we are able to hear him clearly.
I very much believe that God answers prayer and the world changes because of it. I have seen way too much as a pastor, and before that a missionary in a different culture, the assertion that that's just a bunch of hooey or projection, I've seen way too much to believe that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just as silly to me. So I do believe God answers our prayer. But again, so you have Abraham, bidding God down in terms of how many people he needs to save Sodom, and Job. You've got both of those visions. And so our prayers never bind God, but just as Jesus said, our prayers, Jesus taught us to call, Jesus is alone to call God Father. He teaches us to call God Father, and to understand that on one hand, he's our wise Father. And so when we ask for stupid stuff, he's like, a wise father to a teenager asking for stupid stuff, it's like, no, no. On the other hand, he's a gracious father, and sometimes we'll ask for stupid stuff, and God will say, okay. What you ask for. But I very much believe that God hears us, and in God's wisdom and everything that he knows, he answers our prayers in the best way that can be answered. So, and I'd be happy to. I'm always happy to pray with people. So
yeah, we'd love to close it up with that if you're open to it. And is there any such thing as adopting a pastor or a pastor? I mean, can you be my pastor too? I've already adopted Mercury. Can I adopt you as well?
Absolutely. I can be your pastor.
Fantastic.
Not a problem. Someone said in the comment section, he's the pastor of the internet. It's like, oh, first they put me with the intellectual dark web. Now I'm the pastor of the whole internet? Oh, heavens.
A big responsibility. Oh, man.
But I'll happily pray for the three of us.
All right. Fantastic.
Lord, I thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been such a joy to talk to Ryan and Mercury. And I've been, I deeply appreciated hearing a bit of their stories, both the stories of becoming sober and the stories of Mercury dealing with his bipolar. And Lord, you are great and we are small, and you are kind and generous and we are selfish. And so I pray, Lord, that you would guide our paths and guide our steps. And when we're being idiots, grab our coats, and when we're doing something good, give us an attaboy. And I pray, Lord, that through this whole Jordan Peterson thing, that many men and women and families and businesses and countries and societies would find life and joy and healing and wisdom. And Lord, I believe in the restoration of heaven and earth, and I believe that the end of this chapter in human history will be a good one. And so I pray, Lord, that you would give us your spirit, that you would give us a taste of your joy, that you would give us hearts of obedience, and that you would make all things new. So hear my prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. I
thank
got a
you,
plane
guys.
to catch, so I'm going to have to hop off.
All right, no problem.
Thank you both so much, Paul. It's just such a pleasure meeting you. You're a hidden gem. Actually, not so hidden anymore, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I love you. This was fantastic. And anytime you want to talk again, we're always here.
Awesome. Thank you much.
See ya.
Bye-bye.